Hi, welcome to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show. We've got a fantastic guest on this morning, Victoria. I'll introduce her and her journey. She's an art psychotherapist, although she'll tell me what the correct term, I probably got that wrong, but she'll tell me exactly what. All these things about naming stuff, it's very, very sensitive in my field, I'm telling you, mate. And but she'll tell me the correct way to say it in a minute. Just to remind you, it's pre-recorded, also it's got a live feel. So if you've got any questions, please message me 07506 319 745. WhatsApp is best. And if you're outside the UK, get rid of the first 0 and add a +44. Don't call me when you see the show because I might be doing something else. I probably will be. Hopefully I'm doing something else, but there you go. Anyway, it's my great pleasure to introduce Victoria to everybody, who is somebody I've known professionally for a while now, and really and personally as well. I've been very lucky to know her on both levels, and it's enriched my life knowing her. I asked her on this morning to come and talk about her sort of life journey, which has been quite extraordinary to watch, actually, I have to say. But I won't reveal too much because she's going to tell us about herself. Welcome, Victoria. How are you doing?
I'm good. Good morning. Thank you for having me on here. It's
Right.
Yeah, it feels kind of fun. Weird, I guess you said to kind of hear someone else say, talk about your life journey. I think when we're in it, we're like, this is it.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. So where are you from originally, Victoria? Where?
So I'm from well, it depends who you ask. I'm from South London, but I'm from Bromley. So some people might tell you that that's Kent. So yeah, I grew
It's
up
all
in the
south of the river as far as I'm concerned. It's all a foreign country when it comes to south of the river. So just to get my terminology correct, what do you call yourself as a professional?
So I'm an integrative creative therapist, and yeah, integrative is the model and the framework that I used. And I say creative therapy because I think it embodies much more of the kind of landscape of therapy that I explore. Because I think sometimes when you say art therapy, you assume paintings. So it's a much more dynamic phrase, I think, but it is a bit long and wordy, and it doesn't roll off the tongue as nicely. So
I used to be called an SRAT.
an SRAD, what's that?
Before the HCPC, when we were another organisation was regulating us. So state registered arts therapist.
Okay, yeah.
SRAT.
SRAD. Sounds very militant. Yeah.
The rat bit was true, definitely. So always been a bit of a ratty in my life. So tell me about integrative, what that means. Is it just simply I pulled everything together and just like a pick and mix from Woolworths?
Yeah. It's really like taking and drawing on a lot of different kind of therapeutic practices. So it is psychodynamic, it's Jungian, it's Gestalt. It's really looking at all of them and kind of kind of pulling from one for the people that you're working with or the individual that you're working with. So it gives you a really big range of tools.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just very inclusive, I think, in what it offers.
Okay. And how does it have a sort of governing framework though? Sort of a sort of intellectual framework? How do you avoid it just being a mess, as it were?
I don't know, actually. I think you mean in terms of
A theoretical framework for what integrative means? Or is it literally about, okay, I've learned all these different models, I'm going to find which one I think is the most appropriate?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it is really kind of just about being with the person in front of you and being like, okay, maybe this is the right kind of way to work, or maybe it's this.
Okay.
But sometimes it's all there, like, and you have to just kind of
Yeah, okay. That's a very technical explanation. That's how we do it. That's how we do it, folks. All that stuff we tell you, it is background game.
all that training just to go.
That's why we're postgraduates, because we can say things like that with confidence, right?
Yeah. Yeah, really selling
Yeah.
it.
And so the creative arts stuff, tell us about that, and sort of what that involves, what the range of arts forms are that you work with, and what you think are important about them.
Yeah, so I guess I was trained in 7 different forms, and that was we were quite specific about those forms and how they helped. I think now as my practice has developed, it's become more and it's become more fluid, but the kind of original art forms, you have the visual arts. So as you'd kind of expect with art therapy, the painting, collaging, maybe looking at images and postcards. And then you have more of a somatic place. So you've got movement, body work, and that's really helpful for kind of releasing trauma, and also just kind of allowing yourself to come back into a present moment. So works in a similar way to kind of exercising, or, you know, but you're diving in with someone else, and really like looking at kind of, oh, how does my body feel in this situation? Why am I kind of tensing up, or like, do I need to stretch out more? And that, yeah, that in itself holds so much.
Yeah.
And then we work with clay, and that I think is really great if you're kind of working through creation and destruction. If you're angry, you know, you can just kind of smash it up, you can break it apart, you can put it back together. Sand trays. So sand trays, we have a big tray of sand, and we kind of put different objects in them, and we play with family dynamics and kind of build sets almost of your life, or of scenes or dreams. And then other parts are kind of the more the verbal creative language that we use. So speaking in metaphors, working with poetry, really kind of looking at the words and the things that we're drawn to. Sometimes that's storytelling for me. I used a lot of folklore. That's a kind of love and passion of mine. So yeah, I think the visual arts, clay, and music. Music is kind of in there as well. And puppetry. And puppetry, yeah, it kind of goes into the world a bit of drama therapy. And yeah, you're able to have conversations with people that maybe you can't have conversations with, or practice. Maybe another part of you needs to have a conversation with another part of you, you know, like all these parts that we have in conflict in our minds. Yeah, so I think the arts in general, I think why I'm so drawn to them, and what I always come back to, is they allow us to play. And when I think about creativity, and I think about how people feel in their lives, does someone feel like they're in a place to play, to have fun, to mess around? And quite often we don't. You know, there are periods of my life where I've really not been able to be creative because, yeah, of depression, because of other things. Because when you're in those intense moments, there isn't space to play. So yeah, I think there's something in the creative process, and it goes back to, you know, being a child, being a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to introduce you to a friend.
Oh yeah, who's this?
My little one, Matteo,
Oh.
who I kept playing with me, and who comes with me everywhere, and we play together. The interesting thing about this, and you know, just thinking about play and projective devices and toys and all these things that are naturally part of human development, literally. So musical appreciation, for people who don't know, is a prior to language appreciation in utero. It's a very early form of sort of bonding that can take place. And you know, I'd encourage people who are pregnant to sort of play favorite music to their kids, and when they're born, you know, while they're in utero, when they're born, you play it when they're born, and it will soothe them and take them right back, etc. So you know, the evolving fetus has certain types of social skills like that, and music, etc. The arts are very much about social skills, and this helps me One, because it just reminds me that as I'm going through a personal struggle at the moment, which you know a little bit about, I've been through a period of depression again, I'm getting treatment for it. And for me, I can become quite antisocial when I'm depressed and withdrawn, which reinforces the social isolation element of it. Carrying this around is silly. It just is silly, and people are silly back with me. And so, on a practical, pragmatic level, it reduces the social isolation, as well as it just reminds me to have a bit of fun in my life,
Yeah.
which is difficult to come by when you're feeling a bit low, right?
Yeah.
And we
And so
filter.
you're kind of holding it and you're, you got a sense of responsibility there. You got someone to look after.
There's that as well, being nurturing. And like I do have people come up to me, like I sit in my local cafe. I've chosen to have lunch in public so that I'm again challenging myself to sort of socialize and engage with people. And I go to a local cafe where they know me well. And a lot of parents bring their kids, and the kids come up and go, "Why have you got a rabbit in your pocket?" And I feel a bit weird about it, but then we start chatting and I talk about it makes me happy when I'm feeling sad and all that sort of stuff. And the parents around here, I know most of them, so they're all fairly tolerant of me. I wouldn't do it I wouldn't go somewhere else. Usually, if I'm somewhere where the people don't know me, it's right in my pocket because otherwise it's a bit weird. Well, I am a bit weird, so that's all right. Did you have a background in the arts? Was that sort of your way? Is that why you chose to work with a modality? So that's one question. The other question is, why did you choose to become a therapist? It seems like you had a terrible punishment from something you'd done in a previous life.
Yeah, maybe if I knew, I wouldn't have done.
Good.
Yeah, so
And
I
also, I want to bring in your yoga stuff as well, because there's new research about yoga, which I've shared with you,
yeah.
and as a primary treatment for depression, which I think is very interesting. We can talk about that as well. So those first two questions, the arts and why on earth did you become a therapist? You
Yeah.
weirdo.
Yeah. Great question. Um, so I actually trained as a fashion designer. That was my kind of first
Okay.
career. And I'd always wanted to be a fashion designer. I had a very romantic notion of what I thought that was. And kind of in my career, I worked in luxury fashion. I did runway shows. I was working in Paris, and Belgium. And yeah, I kind of, the more I got into the industry and the kind of intenseness of it, the more I started to fall out of love with it. And then I got relocated to work for a brand in Sweden, and I stayed there for some time. And that brand was very 9 to 5. So suddenly I just had like more spare time. And I was like, oh, okay, what do I want to do with myself in the evenings, in the rest of the time? And I didn't really know at that point, but eventually one day I just said, right, I'm going to stop working in fashion, quit my career, which was, yeah, it was quite a big move. And yeah, I just started working in a bar in Sweden. I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I know that I want to do something creative. I know I want to work with people,
Yeah.
but I didn't know what that looked like. And then COVID happened. I ended up back in the UK, and I was applying to do a fine art master's in Brighton, but it was a course that was kind of specifically to do with working with people with special educational needs,
Okay.
kind of, yeah, working within communities in that way. And in the interview, the woman actually said to me, I think you want to be an art therapist in what you're telling me. Like, it sounds like this is what you want to do. And art therapy is something I know about kind of through my brother. So my brother has special needs, and he used to kind of go to art therapy groups when he was younger. But it was never something I myself had been involved in. And actually, I had been in therapy as a child, but those experiences weren't very good. So if I was basing a career based off of that, we'd be quite worried.
Thank you for saying that. I think it's really important that we have this levity around these subjects because it's what happens, right?
Yeah.
It really is. And getting overly serious about this. And it's a good example for me of somebody who's learned from negative experiences and not become embittered by them.
Yeah.
And that's one of the sort of keys, as you know, to having a life that where we manage psychological distress more effectively is the ability to flip experiences and reframe them, look at them from a different perspective, which I think the creative arts give us that. That's what they give us in Oodles, is that capacity to transform our own internal experience of ourselves into something else. So for me, that was a really lovely example of you sort of thinking about that. But you'd seen art therapy. We should say, I suppose, because I mean, the public are not that interested in all these different salami sliced definitions of things. But art therapy, like I'm a drama therapist, which is a protected title, legally protected title. If somebody claims to be a drama therapist who's not regulated, doesn't have the appropriate qualifications, it technically that can be prosecuted. I'm not sure anybody would, though, to be honest. And art, I think it's art therapist or art psychotherapist, I can't remember which.
Art psychotherapist, yeah.
That's a regulated title, and art therapy generally tends to be associated with that. And so people are thoughtful about terminology because of that, because it's a bit like if somebody calls themselves a doctor, that is illegal unless you are a doctor, medical doctor, an MD. And so people shouldn't be able to pretend to be a medical doctor if they're not actually qualified. I mean, that makes sense. And so there's that question going on. So that's why we have some of these questions going on. But so your brother was in that type of art therapy, which is the regulated side, and you were seeing that. Then your experiences in child psychotherapy, do you mind saying what that was like?
To be honest, I don't have that many memories of it, but I was in individual therapy and then in family therapy. And I just remember not being held at all in the space.
Right.
I also think I wasn't someone that felt comfortable talking about any of my experiences. So then suddenly to be in a room with a stranger, because my parents had kind of put me there. Yeah, there was a lot tied up in that, and it wasn't held very well. And I just ran away from it.
Okay. Was it talking as opposed to?
It wasn't creative. It was predominantly talk based. And I think for most of them, I just like sat there and stared at the floor.
And how old were you? Do you mind saying?
So I think it was on and off between the ages of like 13 and 18.
Right.
So
which is an awkward time in life for anyone.
And
that's like
for people that struggle with social anxiety, it's great.
But would you, on reflection, say you had some of the issues around being a young carer with a disabled sibling and stuff like that? Not as a negative thing, but just on reflection, would you look back and say that?
Yeah, I really struggled for a long time with my brother having special needs.
Right.
It was really difficult. There was other kind of things going on at the same time in my house, and I felt really alone. And the experience, it wasn't really spoken about. And so it was just kind of what it was, and I was expected to get on with it. But
these days, hopefully, professionals would spot that in a child. Oh, you've got a disabled sibling, not to pathologize it, but just to say we now know the evidence is that the non-disabled child can lose out on certain aspects of their childhood because of that, because the family is understandably focused on meeting the needs of the child with greater needs, if you like. And so the other children can tend to become a bit lost, which is interestingly where this sort of stuff comes into play. Because that's what we need to do as kids. Actually, I would say we need to do all our lives, quite seriously. Why reserve it for childhood when it's so much fun? Is my opinion. And so, do you think, on reflection, that type of experience has geared you or shifted you towards wanting to work in that field, as it were?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a lot of people go into therapy or into the training thinking, oh, I want to be here because I want to kind of help other people, which is true, but also there's an element of it that you're also trying to heal something in yourself, I think. And there are a lot of people that don't go on to practice as therapists or counselors. They've just been through this experience. But it is in me, like to be there to kind of work with other people. I think also seeing my brother and the help and support he has had and how amazing that has been on him and for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is definitely something there.
Unfortunate that the therapist you saw as a teenager wasn't able to create. You talk about this word, it wasn't very well held. Do you want to explain in your words what that means? I think I know what you mean, but just explain what that means.
Yeah, I think a really important part of the therapeutic process for me is being able to be in a space where you can almost just melt. You know, there's someone else there that is kind of is physically almost doing this, you know, like holding a space where you can just feel like you can say what you need to say, you can create how you want to create. It's a really safe, non-judgmental environment. And that holding is so important. And it's something I really...
But you're not meaning physical holding, are you? It could
No,
involve those.
metaphorical holding, in my case anyway. Yeah, it's that the space feels safe, essentially, that there is really kind of, it's confidential, you know, it's all the things that kind of therapy is.
But it's not just that, is it? You're talking about something more. What it's making me think of is this idea of an emotional joining, making it possible to sort of feel like those feelings I've had that had nowhere to attach to in the past finally have somewhere to attach to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think having also gone through, now being in therapy, being a therapist, part of my training, I also had to be in therapy, and really experiencing that in a different way, and kind of seeing that relationship between the therapist and the individual that are working together, because the relationship, it is really important, and it is very relational in the kind of therapy that I practice, because we don't exist alone. And
let's hope not.
Yeah.
Seriously, I mean, there are some people who feel that they are alone, and if you do, if that's triggered you, you're not. And we should say that that sort of what we call solipsistic thinking, that depressive, detached experience can be worked through. So if you're in that space at the moment, just know that there is plenty of help out there, and that you can work through this. So don't be thinking of doing anything silly, folks. Sort of, you can reach out if you start. The start of my journey of getting help was reaching out to the Samaritans. Actually, that's the first people I called and asked for help. I've had lots of help, professional and non-professional, since, and I'm very grateful for it. But the Samaritans, we'll put a number out there for you to sort of reach out to them, folks. Have you got experience in yourself, do you think, of that sort of solipsistic, isolated stuff? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, and I think, like, I can relate to what you said as well about when I go through experiences that are challenging, and that's happened to me, in the last year. I retreat, and I go inwards, and it's really hard to reach out. And
everybody needs a rabbit.
yeah.
Rabbit reaches out for you. No effort reaching out. No effort social skills. Great advocacy for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
You want to talk about that? Yeah, we can come to that and talk about it. Now, I should say, Victoria and I talked before the show started, and we talked about what you do and what you don't talk about in safe boundaries, and the ability to say, no, I don't want to talk about that. Yes, I can talk about that, because it is about presenting the processed stuff as well as the real feelings. It's not about just ripping your guts open. I did tease her and say I want some sort of emotional seppuku from you. It's like, what? Not, I don't really want that. What I'm intrigued with, what I'm getting to, is this point about, as a therapist, doing your own work. That's what we're talking around. And there's different views of what is effective in terms of being a therapist, a counselor, a healer, more and more research is showing that the therapeutic relationship is important as well as other things. I mean, historically, the therapeutic relationship was all that was offered, and I think that's led to all sorts of problems. But it'd be interested to hear from you in terms of your experience, because some of it has been good and some of it has not been so good for you. And I wonder if you don't mind talking about that a little bit.
In what context? In the
And for
differences?
your personal growth and development, your professional growth and development, and what has worked and what has not, and the decisions that you've made.
Yeah.
Is that clear enough, Victoria?
Yeah, that's clear. I think as well within that, like you said, it's, you know, sometimes when I tell people what I do, I think people have this idea that I must live a very like I was going to say Zen, I don't know what the word is, but a very balanced life. And it's not true. I think, you know, I have been through moments of real loss and grief, and that is also part of the journey. And, you know, the training to be a therapist, a counselor, it is very intense. And the training that I did, the kind of approach, the psychodynamic approach, it's very digging. You're kind of deep diving, kind of what's there, what's at the bottom. And there's something in that is very unraveling. And there's a part of that I can kind of understand, because you're trying to kind of work out what's your shit, like what's my shit and what's someone else's shit. But the intensity of the training, you know, you're in therapy, you're in group therapy, and you're constantly studying all of these things. So suddenly you're in places where you're psychoanalyzing yourself with everyone, with your friends, with your family, with the random person that works, you know, in the coffee shop down the road. And that becomes exhausting, because suddenly you're like, is this me? Is this me? And you almost become paralyzed by this overthinking that is, it's really kind of destructive. I think the training really just, it breaks you down. And yeah, you kind of come out of it almost like, you know, gathering parts of yourself back together to kind of rebuild. And the training that I did, I decided to kind of exit after a few years. And that decision, there was an option to do that. You could kind of, there was a different route to go. And I was just down in this bottom of unraveling. And I just thought, this doesn't sit right. Something in this, I can't keep doing this spiral because it's not, I just can't breathe, is really how it felt.
Yeah.
And actually a friend of mine, she'd made the decision to kind of leave. She also has a very similar approach to me, you know, it's very embodied, it's somatic. And I think her doing it it gave me permission somewhere to be like, okay, yeah, this doesn't feel right, so I'm going to also leave. Yeah. And along that way, you know, I was still kind of in the training, like finishing my qualification. And I was working on a placement. I also had another job that started, and there were kind of people in the industry and just back in the world that really just helped support me. Yeah. Be like, okay, it almost just kind of like help, not hold me, but like just nudge me along a little bit. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's been a few years of rebuilding, I think. Within that, I also went through a lot of personal stuff and had to take some time out of practicing, which is also really important to talk about. I think that, you know, we have to do that. And to be able to say, like, I am not in a place right now to be there for someone else, because I am struggling to be there for myself. Yeah. And yeah, kind of coming through that as well. Yeah, it has been quite a journey. I don't know if I answered.
You have perfectly. You have. I mean, I think you got a bit lost in your answer, and that's why you're questioning yourself. It's like, because there's a bit of rumination that goes on in some of these experiences, isn't it? We go back and we just go, where am I? I'm disconnected. and it's a really interesting sort of reminder of that thing. So my training originally was psychodynamic, and I'm grateful I did the training, but also I had a similar type of experience. I wanted some tools to help people. because it isn't helpful for me as a human being to just keep going backwards and backwards and backwards and backwards and unraveling. And some people use this idea of the onion, right? Peeling the onion. And I always thought, well, what happens if you keep peeling that onion? You've got nothing left
Yeah.
in the center of it, except you've got a few dried out peelings of what used to be an onion.
Yeah.
It's like, it just never worked for me, that. Do you know what I mean? So, and just for folk who are listening, we call that insight-based approaches. So insight-based approaches are about who am I? But those approaches were developed a long time ago with a specific type of client group who were very Viennese aristocrats, overthinking anyway, over intellectual, very repressed. You know, there were messages going through fan flutters and things. We don't live in that world. I don't know if you do, but I don't live in that world anymore. And
Well,
my
also
experience.
it was a very privileged, like Eurocentric way of being, you know?
Yeah, and also because the world that I live in, and I think you live in, and we live in, I take a risk of saying that, is we need to acquire ways of relating that are better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's about, in a technical term, it's about ego development, not ego unraveling. We don't have that much ego anyway, to be honest, in the modern world. Right. And we need more tools and resources. And that's how I interpret it. Does that resonate with you as a sort of statement?
Yeah. And I think coming out the other side of the training and really feeling like, okay, I can see how it is sometimes helpful for people to, unpeel, you know, the onion and get to that kind of point. But also, it is a very privileged place to be in, to be able to sit in those kind of therapeutic spaces long term. And people, like individuals in communities, need support, you know, to exist, to function, to go to work, to live in this present moment. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think people want help, which is a reasonable request to make.
Yeah.
And I think as professionals, we need to reasonably respond to that request, not by saying, because if I think about somebody like Winnicott, I'm sure you've read Winnicott, would always be on an art therapy training course. The god of
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
sort of
If
like,
you've got a toy rabbit, you know about
I
Winnicott.
know about Winnicott for sure. In fact, he was based in our borough in Hackney.
Oh, really?
There's a community mental health service over by Hackney Farm, which is named after him,
Yeah.
because he was based in one of the hospitals down there, the old hospital, Hackney Hospital. Anyway, coming back to, there was a passage in one of his books where he describes in great delight having regressed a patient back into the hospital bed. And I'm like reading it going, what?
Yeah, like, yeah,
No!
yeah.
And
Kind
that,
of,
I think it encapsulates what you're describing. That,
yeah.
and again, not attacking. I'm just saying it's inappropriate, really, for the vast majority of people that we're working with. Thinking about the arts, though, and this is the interesting thing about the arts, is that they are a prior to a lot of things in human culture. And it tends to be when things are transhistorical and transcultural, which the arts are,
Yeah.
they've always been around. They're early forms of human development. They're very much embedded in growing humans. Children will naturally do these things, and they'll do them across cultures. They'll be doing them everywhere. And that usually means that that's quite important.
Yeah.
Thinking about the arts specifically, what would you say are important in terms of psychological well-being, health, development? So that's a big question, and it's still being researched. But from your perspective and your development in your career and the next steps that you're making.
Yeah. So I have like a few different
Go on,
things.
just go for
Hopefully
it.
I'll remember them all. But I think there's something about the arts, like you said, that it kind of precedes our language. It's non-verbal.
Yeah.
So that in itself is very like inclusive. And it means that we can be in spaces and communicate and build a language that we both speak the same language, essentially. And I think that's very important, that someone has the power to communicate how they feel through something.
And it's a non-verbal communication. It's more immediate, I guess, in that sense. It's metaphoric. It is
Yeah.
communication. transmitting meaning between human beings, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, there are studies that show that, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's like 80% of kind of the communication we have is nonverbal.
Yeah.
You know, it is in that space. So I think that's very important. I think also the embodied
The
nature.
space being the relational space between human beings.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah. And the embodied nature of it, you know, I think you touched on that earlier, but it brings us back into the present moment. You know, there is something about it that's like, okay, you know, if I said to someone, oh, how are you feeling in your body today? And someone's feeling quite tense, it's a real today question. And so also in the same way that when we're kind of re-experiencing moments of trauma and our body feels a bit frozen in those moments, it's how do we bring you back here to this moment where you are safe in this space? Yeah, so that's
Mediating the experience in some way.
exactly, yeah. And I think the arts in general, the creative landscape, there's, you know, you touched on it earlier, within that there's kind of movement. For me, that's very important, the movement aspect of it and how our bodies kind of work through things. And I know there's a lot of studies on that, and it's developing more and more. That if we can connect to our body in that way, it just helps us, you know.
My experience as well, I'm going to add this in. My experience as well, when I was going through the very difficult periods of life with surviving with post-traumatic stress disorder without effective psychological treatment, the arts communities which I worked in were the only communities that would tolerate somebody as strange as me, to be honest, because they were so broad-based and bohemian. I could get away with it, and I could form really strong human relationships. And I think there might be something in that as well. I don't know what your experience is.
Yeah, well, in fact, I do a lot of somatic dancing and a lot of kind of within the worlds of, I don't know, more free expressive dancing, and that's really important to me. And when I was still working in fashion and when I was still feeling a bit like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, and was just kind of fumbling along in life, I ended up at it was, I can't remember what it's called. It was called like Let Go or something, and it was one of these kind of sober dance experience groups. And it was something in that, and I just felt like I came home in my body with a group of people, and that suddenly became very important because it informed kind of my own practice and where I wanted to go. And as I kind of developed, I feel like being able to find those spaces, for me it was a kind of movement-based space, but I know, you know, there are other spaces such as you know, yoga studios or kind of like community reading groups, whatever it is. It's about that community aspect of finding somewhere you can go and have a shared experience.
Yeah, and also, again, I think this relates to the arts therapies in general. Like a shared activity allows us to relate to each other via the activity, whereas relating directly might be too much.
Yeah.
But that can often be the experience in, say, therapy for people. And maybe that's what your experience was when you were a teenager, was it was just too much to try and deal with this relationship. Whereas if they'd plonked something in the middle, you could relate it to that thing in the middle, had some distance from the anxiety, the difficulties, the feelings of failure that you have about relationship, and then that becomes the container for beginning a conversation and developing the language and the emotional sort of intuition. Coming back to, you mentioned yoga and dance, and I want to come back to those because I know both of those are really important to you, but they're very important to me as well. And there's a new study out in the BMJ looking at the use of exercise in the broadest sense, the broadest definition of exercise possible, showing that exercise now may be really useful as a primary treatment for depression and all forms of depression. We've always had exercise, or what's called behavioral activation in CBT, as an aspect of treatment for psychological distress, particularly depression and anxiety, which are the two ones that we're mainly talking about today. But now this new study is looking at as a primary treatment, and specifically, which is really interesting, it says one of the best forms of treatment is dancing. The top of the league in terms
Yeah.
of as a primary treatment for depression as a form of exercise. And also the use of yoga,
Yeah.
qigong, and various things. And yoga, this study is tentatively suggesting, is really effective, especially for men,
Yeah.
as a primary treatment for depression. Now, dance and yoga is very much part of who you are as a person as well. Could, would you mind talking about those things a little bit, and your experience, and why you experience them as useful and important?
Yeah, I think dance especially, when I'm in that space, I feel alive, I think something inside me that lights up. And I think it's just a very free way, especially when I don't know, I guess I've been through so many periods of my life where I have been in places of depression, and I have been quite disconnected from my body. And I think
Yeah,
it's that bringing yourself back into connection and feeling quite free. And also being able to dance in whatever way you want, or move in whatever way you want, it's empowering. There's a kind of like, this is me in this moment, and I've got
and
this.
just even describing it, your face is lighting up. So
Yeah.
you're sharing that experience of being lit up from inside, just even describing it, which is wonderful.
Yeah. And I think I don't believe that dancing is maybe everyone's way, but I do think we all have something. Well, hopefully we can all find that thing that helps us. For me, when I'm dancing, I am here in my body now. And all the voices, all the stress, all the sadness, it kind of goes.
Yeah,
Or it doesn't go, but I can dance with it, and I can be with that experience.
yeah.
Um,
But
and
you
I
also
think,
do yoga as a participant as well, don't you?
yeah, yeah.
What's your experience of that? And I also know that, I happen to know this, I hope you don't mind me saying, but you also sometimes do high energy stuff, box fit and stuff like that. And just in this broad context of movement, activity, exercise, which we know is really important, it just in terms of your experience, if you don't mind sharing that, of those things.
Yeah. I mean, I'm laughing because I'm thinking back to when I was younger. I definitely wasn't someone that ever exercised, or, I was really eating a lot of bacon sandwiches,
Yeah,
and smoking way, way too much. That was my experience. But there is something about feeling, I guess feeling, I'm a bit, what's the word? I don't want to use the word strong, but that's feeling kind of empowered in my body.
yeah,
Also, as I get older as a woman, there's something in that feels important. But also with the high energy things like boxing, for instance, it's a releasing. There's especially if we struggle, which I do, to always kind of communicate my experience, share how I'm feeling. If I can get into a room and just like, shake it out. And when you kind of look at the studies and look at how animals kind of work through trauma, or if
yeah,
they've been, they shake it out. Yeah, exactly. You just kind of do that. But we don't. And if we're not releasing those things, we're just kind of walking through the world, building it up. So those high energy practices, I think, offer a chance to do that,
yeah,
and to kind of release. And you
yeah.
feel good. You come out of it and you're really full of adrenaline, and you're like, okay, great, let's,
Yeah.
get on with
Absolutely.
it.
I totally agree. And thank you for sharing that experience. And it's sort of something I would echo. We used to, when I was working with kids company, we used to do a thing with the kids of getting them into the local boxing gym so they'd learn how to manage the aggression. And there are studies show that if you're a aggressive person, you want to down regulate as much as possible. So things like yoga, because of the emphasis on breathing and the vagal nerve being at the back of the throat and all that sort of stuff, those breathing techniques down regulate. But for somebody who's more depressive, going and doing a HIIT class is a really, really, really good idea. And getting in touch with the angry fight back is actually a pretty good thing to do,
Yeah,
particularly if you've been a victim to which has made you depress that capacity to be assertive.
yeah, yeah. And I think that the hardest thing is, it's like that, the bridge to get there. I think when you're in those places and you are depressed, or you're struggling with kind of not just depression, anxiety, whatever the endurance is, it's like getting there, isn't it? That's the really hard bit.
Yeah. And the other thing I think is quite important is that a lot of these activities require you to join groups to do them, and that necessarily has a benefit, I think.
Yeah.
And really good stuff. Where are you at the moment in terms of you took this break from your career, you're back in it. What's happening now that you're back in it? What's sort of the developments in your career?
Yeah, so I'm about to start a new job, which is for the charity Mind, and I'm really excited about that. It's working in Hackney in the community. And I think given what the kind of grief and the challenges that I went through last year, it's really, and also the kind of coming off the back of the training, it's been a year of rebuilding. And I feel very grateful to be able to stand in this place and have a clearer direction of how I would like to work with people, and that is community based. So it's shared experience, it's group work, it is one-on-one stuff as well. But I think it's really being able to share our stories with people. That feels really important. And also knowing what's kind of culturally appropriate. And maybe one-to-one therapy isn't that, maybe it's kind of being there in a group full of women because you've experienced something that only women can connect to, or vice versa. So I think it's asking those questions, and I feel really, really strongly about that. And the job in that capacity feels like it is also asking those questions. And then aside from that, I also have my individual private practice. I also work with you. And I feel like I've come out of what has been a really challenging time I feel very grounded, and I'm excited about what's coming.
Wonderful. And also, I think Hackney Mind are lucky to have you, to be honest. And the people are going to turn up to get the services are going to get a great service. That point about broader than therapy, that moving into the therapeutic and how do we make the world more healing, I think is a really important point, and I'm totally with you on that one. There was also, I was thinking about something without getting overly slushy about this. The UK has been going through some tough times. Right, and we need to heal, desperately need to heal. And we need to heal in a really important way where we rebuild connections, because I think we've become so disconnected for whatever reason. It doesn't matter. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not a great believer in going in the past and going, that's why. Never really worked for me. Now, what do I do now? And I think to me, your story is a bit of a metaphor for hopefully we're turning a corner on that, and we're going to, as a country, begin to come together a bit more. And reassert the need to form connection, to form healing partnerships with each other, which is really important.
And I think the word healing is important, and I think it's a healing framework we should be looking at rather than a therapy framework, or it's a healing framework, and that looks different for everyone.
Yeah, and also I think that there's an issue about there isn't enough people who are skilled in the dyad work anyway. That's a fact. And we'll never have enough people who are properly qualified to meet psychological need. And so we have to be, dare I say, creative. Oops. We might need to be creative in the way we do these things. I'm really, really excited for you. Having known you for a while and sort of watched your journey, being very impressed by you as a human being and your courage to grow and the courage to change. It takes a lot of courage to sort of face up. I've made mistakes. Let's try again. Help seeking is the secret of life, I think.
And being able to, I think I feel very grateful for the support I have had around these past years that have got me to this place.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Wonderful to have you on the show, Victoria. I hope everybody else got as much from it as I did, and I'll see you all at the next show. Don't know what it'll be because I never do. Even when we were recording them live, I never knew. So who knows? It'll be something. You stay there, Victoria. Bye bye to everybody, and I'll see you the next time.
Thank you. Bye.